In 1992, 4 flight attendants walked into Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for a routine overnight shift and were never seen again. No bodies, no evidence, no witnesses. For 26 years, their families searched for answers in a case that baffled investigators and haunted an entire airline industry. But when construction workers broke through a sealed maintenance tunnel in 2018, they discovered something that would finally expose the horrifying truth about what happened in those underground corridors and the monster who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. If you're drawn to mysteries that delve into the darkest corners of human nature, subscribe to True Stories Vault for more haunting true crime investigations. The fluorescent lights hummed in Terminal C of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as Patricia Vance checked her reflection in the crew lounge mirror one last time. It was 9:47 p.m. on November 14, 1992, and she adjusted her navy blue uniform jacket, smoothing the golden wings pinned above her heart. At 31, Patricia had been flying for American Airways for 8 years, and tonight's red-eye to Seattle would be just another routine flight. "You ready?" asked Denise Holbrook, her friend and fellow flight attendant, stepping out of the restroom. Denise was 26, blonde, with the kind of warm smile that put nervous passengers at ease. "As ready as I'll ever be for a midnight departure," Patricia replied, slipping her compact into her overnight bag. The lounge door opened, and 2 more flight attendants entered. Yolanda Martinez, 29, her dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, carried a thermos of coffee. Behind her came the youngest of their crew, 23-year-old Bethany Cross, still new enough to the job that she double-checked her manual before every flight. "Flight 447 crew, reporting for duty," Yolanda announced with mock formality, raising her thermos in salute. They had 40 minutes before boarding would begin. The plan was simple: review the flight manifest, check their equipment, and head down to Gate C-47, where their Boeing 757 was being prepared. It should have been a routine night, one of thousands they had each experienced. None of them could have known that in less than an hour, they would all disappear without a trace. Patricia gathered her things and led the group toward the door. "Let's get the equipment check done early. I want to grab something to eat before we board." They walked together down the wide terminal corridor, their rolling suitcases clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. The airport was quieter at this hour. Fewer travelers, fewer staff. Their heels echoed in the vast space as they made their way toward the service elevator that would take them down to the ground-level crew entrance. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The 4 women stepped inside, and Denise pressed the button for the lower level. As the doors slid closed, none of them noticed the maintenance worker in stained coveralls watching from behind a cleaning cart 30 feet away, his eyes tracking their descent. The elevator descended into darkness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bedroom where Ellen Vance sat on the edge of her bed, her phone pressed to her ear with trembling hands. 26 years had passed since her sister Patricia vanished, but Ellen still kept her number saved in her contacts, still sometimes found herself starting to dial it before reality crashed back in. "Mrs. Vance, this is Detective Sandra Briggs with the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport Police," the voice on the phone said. "I'm calling because we've had a significant development in your sister's case." Ellen's breath caught. She had received calls over the years, each one raising and crushing hope in equal measure. Tips that led nowhere, possible sightings that evaporated under scrutiny, theories that collapsed under investigation. She had learned to armor herself against hope. "What kind of development?" Ellen asked, her voice carefully controlled. "We'd prefer to discuss this in person," Detective Briggs replied. "Would you be able to come to the airport today? I know this is sudden, but the situation is time-sensitive." Ellen glanced at the clock on her nightstand. It was barely 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in March 2018. She had taken the day off from her job at the accounting firm where she worked, planning to spend it organizing her mother's belongings. Her mother had passed away 6 months earlier, having never learned what happened to her eldest daughter. "I can be there by 10, Ellen said. thank you. Ask for me at the airport police headquarters. It's in Terminal A." After the call ended, Ellen sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the framed photograph on her dresser. It showed two sisters at a backyard barbecue in the summer of 1991. Patricia, radiant in a sundress, her arm around a younger Ellen, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. Ellen had been 19 then, just starting college. Patricia had been her hero, the glamorous older sister who traveled the world and sent postcards from exotic cities. The day Patricia disappeared, Ellen's life had fractured into before and after. She showered and dressed mechanically, her mind churning with possibilities. What could they have found after all this time? The official investigation had gone cold within months of the disappearance. 4 flight attendants, vanishing from one of the busiest airports in the country without a single witness, without leaving behind any evidence. It had been called everything from a voluntary disappearance to alien abduction in the media frenzy that followed. Ellen knew better. Patricia would never have left without a word. None of them would have. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes through morning traffic. Ellen had avoided DFW for years after the disappearance, the sight of those terminals too painful to bear. Even now, pulling into the massive complex of runways and buildings, she felt her chest tighten with old grief. Airport police headquarters occupied a nondescript building adjacent to Terminal A. Ellen parked and made her way inside, giving her name to the officer at the front desk. Within minutes, a woman in her mid-40s approached, extending her hand. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Detective Sandra Briggs. Thank you for coming so quickly." Detective Briggs had short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that had clearly seen too much. She led Ellen down a corridor to a small conference room where another man waited, this one older, perhaps 60, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement. "This is Captain Frank Morrison," Detective Briggs said. "He was one of the original investigators on your sister's case back in 1992. Ellen shook his hand, noting the sadness in his expression. "You remember Patricia?" "I remember all 4 of them," Morrison said quietly. "That case has haunted me for 26 years. Please sit down." They settled around the conference table, and Detective Briggs opened a folder, though she didn't immediately reference its contents. Instead, she looked directly at Ellen. 3 days ago, a construction crew was doing renovation work in the lower levels of Terminal C, she began. They were updating the electrical systems in some of the older maintenance corridors. These are areas that haven't been accessed in years, some of them sealed off when the airport expanded in the late 90s. Ellen's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. When they broke through a wall into an abandoned service tunnel, they found something, Detective Briggs continued. 4 sets of skeletal remains. The room tilted. Ellen heard a sound escape her throat, something between a gasp and a sob. "We haven't made a formal identification yet," Captain Morrison said gently. "But the remains were found with personal effects, airline uniforms, employee badges, and preliminary forensic analysis suggests the remains have been there for approximately 25 to 30 years. Detective Briggs slid several photographs across the table. Ellen's hands shook as she picked them up. They showed corroded metal badges, scraps of navy blue fabric, and the unmistakable shape of the golden wings flight attendants wore. One photo showed a badge more clearly than the others. Ellen could just make out the engraved name, P. Vance. "Oh God," Ellen whispered. "Oh God, Patricia." Detective Briggs reached across the table, her hand hovering near Ellen's but not quite touching. "I'm so sorry. We'll need DNA confirmation, of course, but given the location and the evidence, we believe these are your sister and her crew." Ellen couldn't breathe. After 26 years of not knowing, of hoping against hope that maybe Patricia was alive somewhere, had amnesia, had started a new life, this brutal finality was almost too much to process. "How?" she managed to ask. "How did they die?" The 2 investigators exchanged a glance. Captain Morrison cleared his throat. The medical examiner is still conducting the full analysis, he said carefully. But there are indicators of trauma to the skeletal remains. This wasn't an accident, Mrs. Vance. We're treating this as a homicide investigation. Ellen's mind reeled. Murder. All four of them, murdered and hidden in a sealed tunnel for over 2 decades. We need your help, Detective Briggs said. You were closely involved in the original investigation. You knew your sister's routines, her life. We're reopening this case with fresh eyes, and anything you can tell us might be crucial. Ellen wiped her eyes, forcing herself to focus. If they had finally found Patricia, if they finally had a chance to learn the truth, she would give them everything she had. What do you need to know? She asked, her voice steadier. Detective Briggs opened her folder fully. Let's start with the night of November 14th, 1992. Tell me everything you remember about the last time you spoke with your sister. Ellen closed her eyes, reaching back through the years to that final phone call. It had been early evening, around 6 o'clock. Patricia had called from her apartment in Arlington, getting ready for her shift. She was tired, Ellen said. She'd been flying a lot that month, picking up extra shifts to save for a down payment on a house. But she sounded happy. She was talking about maybe taking some time off around Christmas, coming to visit our parents. Did she mention anything unusual? Captain Morrison asked. Anything that worried her? Ellen thought carefully. She said something about airport security being tightened. There had been some incident the week before. I don't remember the details. She wasn't concerned about it, just mentioned it in passing. Detective Briggs made a note. Do you remember if she mentioned anyone specific at work? Someone who made her uncomfortable? Any conflicts with colleagues or passengers? Patricia got along with everyone, Ellen said. She loved her job. The only thing she ever complained about was the scheduling system, but that was standard. What about her personal life? Detective Briggs pressed. Was she seeing anyone? Any relationships that might have been problematic? Ellen shook her head. She'd broken up with her boyfriend about 6 months earlier, amicably. She wasn't seeing anyone new as far as I knew. They continued for another hour, Detective Briggs asking detailed questions about Patricia's habits, her friends among the flight crew, her routes between home and the airport. Captain Morrison occasionally interjected with questions that revealed just how thoroughly he had studied the original case. Finally, Detective Briggs closed her folder. We'll be conducting interviews with all the original witnesses we can locate, staff members who were working that night, other flight crews, anyone who might have seen something. We're also going to examine all airport security footage from that period that still exists. After 26 years? Ellen asked doubtfully. You'd be surprised what gets preserved, Captain Morrison said. And technology has advanced. We can enhance and analyze footage now in ways that weren't possible in 1992. Ellen stood, her legs unsteady. When will you know for certain about the identification? The DNA analysis should be complete within a week, Detective Briggs said. We'll contact you as soon as we have confirmation. In the meantime, please don't speak to the media about this. We need to control the information flow to protect the investigation. Ellen nodded numbly. The media. Of course they would descend like vultures once this got out. The story of the vanished flight attendants had been national news in 1992, the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories. Finding their remains would reignite all of that. As she drove home, Ellen's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in years, Rachel Holbrook, Denise Holbrook's younger sister. Ellen pulled over and answered. Rachel? Ellen, I just got a call from the police. Rachel's voice was thick with tears. They found them. They found Denise. I know, Ellen said softly. I just left the airport. 26 years, Rachel said. 26 years of wondering, and they were there the whole time, right there under the airport. They stayed on the phone for a long time, 2 women who had become linked by tragedy, crying together across the miles, mourning sisters who had walked into an airport one November night and never come home. The conference room at Airport Police Headquarters buzzed with activity as Detective Sandra Briggs assembled her task force. It had been 3 days since the discovery of the remains, and the media blackout wouldn't hold much longer. She needed to move fast. Seated around the table were 6 people: herself, Captain Morrison, 2 younger detectives from the Dallas Police Department's cold case unit, a forensic analyst, and a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun. For those who don't know her, this is Dr. Helen Casper, Detective Briggs said, gesturing to the gray-haired woman. She's a forensic anthropologist who specializes in historical crime scene analysis. She's been examining the remains and the tunnel location. Dr. Caspar nodded curtly and opened her laptop. What we have is both more and less than you might expect. The tunnel where the remains were discovered is part of the airport's original infrastructure, built in 1974 when this section of Terminal C was first constructed. It was used for maintenance access to electrical and HVAC systems. She pulled up a blueprint on the projection screen. In 1998, during a major terminal expansion, this entire section was deemed obsolete. Rather than tear it out, they simply sealed it off. The entrance was covered by new construction, essentially creating a tomb. So, whoever put the bodies there knew the tunnel was going to be sealed? Asked Detective Raymond Torres, one of the younger investigators. Not necessarily, Dr. Caspar replied. The sealing happened 6 years after the disappearances, but whoever hid the bodies chose a location that was already rarely accessed. The tunnel's entrance in 1992 would have been through a maintenance area that was typically locked and only used by specific personnel. She clicked to the next image, showing photographs of the discovery site. The remains were found in what appears to be a storage alcove, approximately 80 feet from the tunnel's original entrance. They were positioned deliberately, laid out side by side. Detective Briggs studied the photos. Even as skeletal remains, there was something profoundly disturbing about seeing 4 bodies arranged so carefully in the darkness. Positioned how? Respectfully or as a display? That's the question, Dr. Caspar said. There's no evidence of binding or restraints that would have survived. The positioning suggests they were placed there with some care, but whether that indicates remorse or something else, I can't say. Captain Morrison leaned forward. What about cause of death? Dr. Caspar's expression darkened. 3 of the 4 victims show clear evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. The injuries are consistent with being struck multiple times with a heavy object, something like a pipe or crowbar. The 4th victim shows different trauma patterns. She paused, and the room fell silent. The 4th victim's hyoid bone is fractured, Dr. Caspar continued. That's the small bone in the throat. A fracture there typically indicates manual strangulation. Detective Briggs felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. So we're looking at someone who bludgeoned 3 victims and strangled 1. Do we know which victim was strangled? Based on the position of the remains and the personal effects found nearby, we believe it was Bethany Cross, the youngest of the 4. The forensic analyst, a thin man named Marcus Webb, spoke up. Why the different method? Why strangle one but use blunt force on the others? That's a key question, Dr. Caspar agreed. It could indicate escalation or de-escalation, depending on the sequence. It could suggest a different emotional state or a different relationship with that particular victim. Or it could simply be opportunistic, based on what was available at the moment. Detective Briggs made notes. What else can you tell us about the scene itself? Dr. Caspar clicked through more images. The tunnel showed no signs of a struggle at the location where the bodies were found. If the murders occurred there, they happened swiftly, without the victims having much chance to fight back. However, we did find trace evidence suggesting the bodies may have been moved a short distance within the tunnel system. Moved from where? Torres asked. We're still mapping it out, but there's a junction point about 40 feet back toward the entrance where we found fabric fibers caught on a sharp edge of exposed conduit. The fibers match the flight attendants' uniforms. Captain Morrison rubbed his temples. So someone killed them, possibly at or near the tunnel entrance. then moved them deeper into the tunnel to hide them. That's one scenario, Dr. Kaspar confirmed. We're also finding other trace evidence. Hair samples that don't match the victims. Fingerprints on metal surfaces that have been protected from degradation. We're running everything through databases, but it's going to take time. Detective Briggs stood and walked to the projection screen, studying the blueprint. Let's talk about access. Who would have been able to get into this maintenance tunnel in November 1992? Captain Morrison pulled out a yellowed file folder, one of many boxes of original evidence that had been retrieved from storage. According to the original investigation, maintenance tunnel access was restricted to 3 groups: airport maintenance staff, airline ground crew supervisors, and airport security personnel. All required keycard access. How many people total are we talking about? Detective Briggs asked. Morrison flipped through pages. In 1992, there were approximately 200 people with access credentials for various maintenance areas throughout the airport. Specific access to the Terminal C lower-level tunnels was more restricted. About 40 people. Do we have names? We have the personnel list from 1992, Morrison said. But that's 26 years ago. People have retired, moved away, died. We're going to have to track down as many as we can. Detective Briggs turned to the 2 cold case detectives. That's your priority. Start with anyone who's still in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I want interviews with every person who had access to those tunnels. The younger detective, a woman named Lisa Park, raised her hand. What about security footage from the night of the disappearance? Is there anything? Morrison's expression turned grim. That's where we run into problems. The airport's security camera system in 1992 was limited compared to today. Most cameras covered passenger areas, not service corridors. The footage that did exist was recorded on tapes that were recycled every 30 days unless flagged for retention. And nobody flagged it? Park asked, surprised. By the time the disappearance was reported and taken seriously, the tapes had already been recycled, Morrison said, and the bitterness in his voice was evident. The flight attendants weren't reported missing until the next morning when they failed to show up for their flight. Even then, the initial assumption was that they'd simply missed their shift or had some personal emergency. It wasn't treated as a critical missing persons case for almost 48 hours. Why the delay? Torres asked. Morrison sighed heavily. Because adults go missing for voluntary reasons all the time. 4 adult women, all employed, all with access to transportation and money. The initial responding officers assumed it would resolve itself. By the time we realized something was seriously wrong, crucial hours had been lost. Detective Briggs could hear the old guilt in Morrison's voice. He had been carrying this case for over 2 decades, and the failure to find these women had clearly haunted him. We work with what we have, she said firmly. Dr. Kaspar, continue the forensic analysis. I want everything you can give me on those remains in that tunnel. Captain Morrison, pull together everything from the original investigation. Every interview, every tip, every theory. We're going to go through it all again with fresh perspective. She looked around the table. One more thing. We need to consider that whoever did this might still be alive and might still be in the area. They managed to kill 4 women in an airport, hide the bodies, and evade detection for 26 years. That suggests intelligence, planning, and access. This person could still be working at the airport. The room fell silent as that reality sank in. We keep this quiet as long as possible, Detective Briggs continued. We don't want to spook our suspect, but we also need to work fast. Dr. Kaspar, how long until we have definitive DNA confirmation on the identities? Another 3 days at most, Dr. Kaspar replied. Then we have 3 days before this becomes public, Detective Briggs said. Let's make them count. As the meeting broke up and the team dispersed to their assignments, Captain Morrison approached Detective Briggs. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not giving up on them. I've been requesting a cold case review for years, but the department never had the resources. If that construction crew hadn't broken through that wall, they'd still be down there. Detective Briggs finished. She put a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to find out who did this. Those women deserve justice, and so do their families." Morrison nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I keep thinking about something. The way the bodies were positioned, laid out carefully. The different method used on the youngest victim. This wasn't random violence. Whoever did this had a relationship with these women, or at least believed they did." Detective Briggs had been thinking the same thing. "You think it was someone they knew?" "I think it was someone who had access to them, who could get close without raising suspicion. Someone they might have trusted, at least initially." As Morrison walked away, Detective Briggs returned to the conference room and stared at the projected blueprint of the tunnel system. Somewhere in that maze of corridors and alcoves, 4 women had met a monster. And that monster had walked away, had continued living their life, had perhaps watched as families mourned and investigators searched in vain. She thought of Ellen Vance, of the pain in her eyes when she had identified her sister's badge. 26 years of not knowing, of hoping and grieving in equal measure. And now, finally, answers were coming. But Detective Briggs knew from experience that sometimes the answers were worse than the mystery. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Kaspar. "Found something else in the tunnel. You need to see this." Detective Briggs grabbed her keys and headed for the door. 3 days until this went public. 3 days to get ahead of the investigation before the media circus began. She just hoped it would be enough. The service elevator descended into the bowels of Terminal C with a mechanical groan that set Detective Briggs's teeth on edge. Dr. Kaspar stood beside her, holding a flashlight and a folder of photographs, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I wanted you to see this in person before I include it in my official report," Dr. Kaspar said as the elevator shuddered to a stop. They stepped out into a concrete corridor that smelled of dust and stale air. Construction barriers blocked off most of the hallway, and yellow caution tape marked the route to the discovery site. A uniformed officer stood guard at the entrance to the sealed section, nodding at them as they approached. "The construction crew has been cleared out for the day," Dr. Kaspar explained, ducking under the caution tape. "We have the area completely secured." They walked through a rough opening that had been sledgehammered through a concrete wall. Beyond it lay the maintenance tunnel, a narrow passage lined with exposed pipes and electrical conduits. Emergency work lights had been strung along the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that made the space feel even more claustrophobic. Detective Briggs followed Dr. Kaspar deeper into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The air grew colder and heavier the farther they went. After about 80 feet, they reached the alcove where the remains had been discovered. The bodies had been removed, but chalk outlines marked where each victim had lain. "The bodies were here," Dr. Kaspar said, gesturing to the outlines, positioned side by side, heads all pointing the same direction. "But that's not what I wanted to show you." She led Detective Briggs past the alcove to a junction where the tunnel branched in 2 directions. The left branch had been completely sealed with concrete, but the right branch continued for another 20 feet before ending at a metal door, rusted and covered in decades of grime. "We didn't notice this door initially because of the rust and the poor lighting," Dr. Kaspar said, "but when we were collecting evidence samples, one of my team members found it." She approached the door and shone her flashlight on the handle. Detective Briggs leaned closer and saw what had caught the forensic anthropologist's attention. Scratches marked the metal around the lock, fresh scratches that had scraped away the rust to reveal clean metal underneath. "Someone opened this door recently," Detective Briggs said, her pulse quickening. "Within the last few weeks, I'd estimate," Dr. Kaspar confirmed, "before the construction crew broke through the wall. Can we open it?" Dr. Kaspar pulled out a large key ring. "Maintenance gave us master keys. This lock is old, but it still works." She inserted a key and turned it with some effort. The lock mechanism groaned, and the door swung inward with a screech of protesting hinges. Beyond the door lay a small room, no more than 10 feet square. It had clearly been used for storage at some point, metal shelving units lining the walls, most of them empty. But what drew Detective Briggs's attention was the corner of the room where a camping chair sat facing the wall. On the wall, someone had arranged photographs. Detective Briggs stepped closer, her skin crawling as the images came into focus. There were dozens of them, pinned to the concrete with thumbtacks. Most were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, showing the 4 flight attendants. Headlines screamed about the mysterious disappearance, the failed investigation, the heartbroken families. But mixed among the news clippings were other photographs, personal ones. Pictures of Patricia Vance at a restaurant, laughing with friends. Denise Holbrook at a shopping mall. Yolanda Martinez leaving her apartment building. Bethany Cross at what looked like a family gathering. "These are surveillance photos," Detective Briggs said, her voice tight. "Someone was watching them before they disappeared." Dr. Kaspar nodded grimly. "And there's more." She pointed to the bottom row of photographs. These were more recent, the paper still white, the images in color rather than the faded tones of the older pictures. They showed Ellen Vance leaving her home, getting into her car. Rachel Holbrook, Denise's sister, walking through a parking lot. Other women Detective Briggs didn't recognize, all photographed without their knowledge. "He's been coming back here," Detective Briggs whispered. "All these years, he's been coming back to this room." On the floor beneath the camping chair lay a spiral notebook. Dr. Kaspar had already photographed it in place, so she carefully picked it up and handed it to Detective Briggs. The detective opened the notebook with gloved hands. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, dated and detailed. The earliest entry was from April 1993, 5 months after the murders. "Returned today. Everything remains undisturbed. They're sleeping peacefully. I sat with them for an hour, explaining again why it had to happen this way. P still doesn't understand, but she will in time." Detective Briggs felt ice forming in her stomach. She flipped through more pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The writer visited the tunnel regularly, sometimes monthly, sometimes with gaps of a year or more. He wrote about the victims as though they were still alive, as though they could hear him. November 14th, 1994. 2 years today. Brought flowers, but there's no place to put them down here. Dee would have liked yellow roses. She always wore a yellow scarf on Tuesdays. I remember everything about her, everything. The entries continued through the years, showing a mind that was deeply fractured. Sometimes the writer expressed remorse, other times justification. Sometimes he wrote about his day-to-day life, mundane details about work and weather, as though journaling to friends. The most recent entry was dated March 2018, just 4 days before the construction crew had broken through the wall. "They're going to tear down this section. I heard the foreman talking about it. I have to move my things, but I can't move them. They've been here for so long. This is where they belong. I've failed them again, just like I failed them that night when everything went wrong." Detective Briggs looked up at Dr. Kaspar. "We need to process every inch of this room. Fingerprints, DNA, anything that can tell us who's been here." "Already in progress," Dr. Kaspar said. "I have a team coming in within the hour, but there's one more thing." She led Detective Briggs to the far corner of the room where one of the metal shelving units stood. On the bottom shelf, partially hidden behind a rusted toolbox, sat a small wooden box. Dr. Kaspar opened it carefully. Inside were 4 items, each wrapped in plastic: a woman's wristwatch, a small gold necklace with a cross pendant, a pearl earring, and a class ring. "Trophies," Detective Briggs said. "Personal effects taken from the victims," Dr. Kaspar confirmed. "We'll need to have the families identify them, but I'd bet anything these belong to the 4 flight attendants." Detective Briggs stared at the items, thinking about what they represented. A killer who had not only murdered 4 women, but who had maintained a relationship with their bodies for over 2 decades, who had stolen pieces of them to keep as mementos, who had photographed their families, suggesting an ongoing obsession that extended beyond the original victims. "This changes everything," she said. "This isn't just a cold case anymore. We're dealing with someone who's been active this whole time. Those recent photographs of Ellen Vance and the others suggest he's choosing new victims," Dr. Casper finished quietly. Detective Briggs pulled out her phone and called Captain Morrison. He answered on the first ring. "Morrison, we need to put protection on the families immediately. Ellen Vance, Rachel Holbrook, any family members of the victims. And we need to find out everyone who's had access to this section of the airport in the last month." She listened to his response, then added, "There's a room down here, a shrine. He's been coming back here for 26 years, and based on what we found, I think he's planning to kill again." After ending the call, Detective Briggs took one last look around the room. The camping chair faced the wall of photographs, positioned so that someone sitting there could study the images for hours. She imagined the killer sitting in this cold, dark space, reliving his crimes, feeding his obsession. "Bag everything," she told Dr. Casper. "Every photograph, every page of that notebook, every fiber and fingerprint. This is our best chance at identifying him." As they made their way back through the tunnel, Detective Briggs's mind raced with implications. The killer had recent access to this sealed area, which meant he either worked in airport maintenance or security, or had connections with someone who did. The level of access required to repeatedly enter this space unnoticed suggested someone with authority, someone trusted, someone who had been hiding in plain sight for over 2 decades. When they emerged from the tunnel into the construction area, Detective Briggs's phone rang again. It was Detective Torres. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "I've been going through the personnel list from 1992, cross-referencing with current airport employees. There are 7 people still working at DFW who had maintenance tunnel access back then." "7," Detective Briggs repeated. "That's actually fewer than I expected." "That's not the problem," Torres said. "The problem is that one of them is Gerald Nichols. He's the current head of Terminal C maintenance operations. He's the one who ordered the construction work that led to discovering the bodies." Detective Briggs felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He knew the bodies were there, and he knew the construction would expose them. "So why order the work?" Torres asked. Detective Briggs looked back at the dark opening in the wall, thinking about the final entry in that notebook. "I've failed them again." "Because he couldn't stop it," she said. "The airport administration ordered the renovations. He tried to prevent it, but when he couldn't, he made sure he was the one who directed the construction crew. He was trying to control the discovery." "Should we bring him in?" "Not yet," Detective Briggs said, her mind working through strategy. "If we spook him now, he might run or destroy evidence. We need to be smart about this. Get me everything on Gerald Nichols. Work history, personal life, connections to the victims. And do it quietly. I don't want anyone tipping him off." She ended the call and turned to Dr. Caspar. "How long until you can process that room?" 48 hours for preliminary results, Dr. Casper said. "But if you need something faster—" "I need everything as fast as you can give it to me," Detective Briggs interrupted. "We're running out of time." As she rode the elevator back to the surface, Detective Briggs thought about Gerald Nichols. If he was the killer, he had been working at this airport for at least 26 years, walking the same halls as thousands of unsuspecting travelers every day, hiding behind a mask of normalcy while maintaining a secret shrine to his victims in the darkness below. And if the recent photographs in that room meant what she feared they meant, he was preparing to kill again. Gerald Nichols lived in a modest ranch house in Euless, a suburb roughly equidistant from the airport and downtown Dallas. Detective Briggs sat in an unmarked car across the street at 6:30 the following morning, watching as lights came on inside the house. Beside her, Detective Torres sipped coffee from a travel mug and studied the file they had compiled on Nichols overnight. 54 years old, divorced twice, no children, Torres read. Started working at DFW in 1988 as a junior maintenance technician. Worked his way up through the ranks, became head of Terminal C maintenance in 2003. Spotless work record, no complaints, no disciplinary actions. Too perfect, Detective Briggs muttered. Neighbors describe him as quiet, keeps to himself. No close friends that anyone knows of. His ex-wives both moved out of state years ago. We're trying to track them down for interviews. The front door opened and a man emerged carrying a lunch cooler and a thermos. He was of average height and build, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore the dark blue uniform of airport maintenance staff. Nothing about his appearance suggested a killer, but Detective Briggs knew that meant nothing. The worst monsters often looked the most ordinary. Nichols got into a white pickup truck and backed out of the driveway. Detective Briggs waited until he turned the corner before starting her own vehicle. "We're just observing today," she reminded Torres. "I want to see his routine, see if he does anything unusual." They followed Nichols at a discreet distance as he drove to the airport. Instead of parking in the employee lot nearest Terminal C, he drove to a more remote lot on the far side of the complex. Detective Briggs made note of it, but didn't find it particularly suspicious. Many employees preferred the less crowded lots. Nichols entered the airport through a service entrance using his key card. Detective Briggs and Torres couldn't follow without being obvious, so they instead headed to the airport police headquarters, where Captain Morrison was coordinating with the forensics team. "Dr. Kaspar's preliminary results are in," Morrison said when they arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red-rimmed and his desk covered with file folders and coffee cups. "And?" Detective Briggs prompted. Morrison handed her a report. "Multiple fingerprints recovered from the shrine room. Most are degraded, but they got several clear prints from the notebook and the wooden box containing the trophies. They're running them through AFIS now, but it takes time. What about DNA? Hair samples from the camping chair. They're processing them, but DNA analysis takes longer than prints." Detective Briggs scanned the report, stopping at one section. They found fibers on the chair, recent fibers, not degraded like the older evidence. Morrison nodded. Dark blue polyester, consistent with airport maintenance uniforms. But that's not conclusive. Dozens of people wear those uniforms. Detective Torres spoke up. "What about the photographs? The recent ones of the families?" "We're having them analyzed," Morrison said. "The photo paper and printing quality suggest they were printed within the last year, probably from a home printer, not a professional lab." Detective Briggs set down the report and turned to the whiteboard that dominated one wall of Morrison's office. He had been reconstructing the timeline of the original case, and now photographs of all 4 victims were pinned to the board alongside maps of the airport and personnel lists. "Tell me about the night of November 14th, 1992, she said. "Walk me through everything that happened." Morrison stood and approached the board, his movements stiff with old guilt. The 4 flight attendants reported for duty at the crew lounge in Terminal C at 9:47 p.m. We know this because they all signed in. Their flight, American Airways 447 to Seattle, was scheduled to depart at 11:30 p.m. He pointed to a timeline he had drawn. At 10:15 p.m., they should have been at Gate C-47 for pre-flight preparations. They never arrived. The gate crew assumed they were running late. By 10:45 p.m., the flight supervisor tried calling them. No answer. At 11 p.m., the flight was delayed. At 11:30 p.m., replacement crew was called in. The original 4 were officially listed as no-shows. "When did someone go looking for them?" Detective Briggs asked. Morrison's expression darkened. "Not until the next morning. Their supervisor filed a report at 6 a.m. on November 15th. Initial investigation treated it as a personnel issue, not a missing persons case. It wasn't until family members started calling that afternoon, worried because none of the 4 had come home or answered their phones, that we realized something serious had happened." "Precious hours lost," Detective Briggs said. "By the time we started a real investigation, the trail was cold," Morrison confirmed. "We reviewed the crew lounge sign-in sheet. We interviewed the other staff on duty that night. We pulled what security footage existed, but we found nothing. It was like they vanished into thin air." Detective Torres studied the board. "What about the maintenance tunnel? Did anyone check it during the original investigation?" Morrison hesitated. We did a sweep of the public areas and some of the service corridors, but the maintenance tunnels were considered low priority. They were locked, access controlled. The assumption was that 4 women wouldn't have gone down there voluntarily, and if they'd been taken by force, there would have been signs of struggle in a public area. Who was working maintenance that night? Detective Briggs asked. Morrison flipped through one of his files. According to the duty roster, there were 3 maintenance workers on shift in Terminal C. One was responding to a plumbing issue in the restrooms, one was doing routine HVAC checks, and one was— He stopped, his finger on a name. Gerald Nichols, Detective Briggs said, reading over his shoulder. Morrison nodded slowly. He was assigned to electrical systems inspection in the lower levels. The room fell silent. Detective Briggs felt the weight of that information settling over them. Gerald Nichols had been working in the area where the bodies were eventually found on the night the 4 women disappeared. Why wasn't he considered a suspect back then? Torres asked. He was interviewed, Morrison said, pulling out a yellowed report. I remember it. He said he was in the sub-level working alone most of the night. No one could confirm his alibi, but no one could disprove it either. He seemed cooperative, genuinely shocked by the disappearances, and there was no physical evidence linking him to anything. Because we didn't know to look in the right place, Detective Briggs said bitterly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Kaspar. Fingerprint match. Call me. Detective Briggs stepped out of the office and dialed. Dr. Kaspar answered immediately. We got a hit on the fingerprints from the notebook, she said. But you're not going to like this. Tell me. The prints belonged to Gerald Nichols. AFIS matched them to prints on file from his airport security clearance background check. Detective Briggs closed her eyes. They had him. Physical evidence placing him at the shrine, proving he had been maintaining that disturbing memorial for years. There's something else, Dr. Kaspar continued. We found prints from someone else too. Smaller prints, likely female. We're still trying to match them, but they appear on several of the more recent photographs. He's not working alone? Detective Briggs asked, surprised. Or he has access to someone else's space. The female prints are overlaid on some of his prints, suggesting she handled the photographs after he did. Detective Briggs thanked her and returned to Morrison's office. We have Nichols' prints in the shrine room, on the notebook and the photographs. We can bring him in. Morrison stood immediately. I'll get a warrant. Wait, Detective Briggs said, thinking fast. We bring him in for questioning. He lawyers up immediately. We need more than his prints in a room. We need evidence directly linking him to the murders. We have his fingerprints at a crime scene, Torres pointed out. At a secondary crime scene, Detective Briggs countered. The defense will argue the shrine room isn't where the murders occurred. They'll say he discovered the bodies years ago and created the shrine out of some twisted grief or fascination, but that doesn't make him the killer. We need to connect him to the actual murders. Morrison sank back into his chair. So, what do we do? Detective Briggs thought about the recent photographs in the shrine, about Ellen Vance and the other family members who were being watched by someone with a history of killing. We need to force his hand. Make him think we're getting close. See how he reacts. That's dangerous, Morrison warned. If he is the killer and he feels cornered, he might make a mistake, Detective Briggs finished. Right now, he thinks he's safe. He's been safe for 26 years. We need to disrupt that sense of security. She turned to Torres. I want surveillance on him around the clock. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. And I want someone reviewing every inch of his work history, looking for any gaps, any unexplained absences that might correlate with other unsolved cases. You think there might be other victims? Torres asked. I think a man who can kill 4 women and hide their bodies for 26 years while maintaining a shrine to them isn't someone who killed just once, Detective Briggs said. This kind of obsession doesn't come out of nowhere. Over the next several hours, they assembled a surveillance team and reviewed Nichols's work history in detail. What they found was disturbing. In 1998, when the tunnel section had been sealed off, Nichols had taken a 2-week vacation, unusual for him. In 2003, just before his promotion to head of maintenance, there had been another missing persons case at the airport, a female janitor who had vanished without a trace. The case was never solved. "Pull everything on that case," Detective Briggs ordered. "I want to know if Nichols was working the night she disappeared." As the afternoon wore on, reports came in from the surveillance team. Nichols had worked a normal shift, conducted routine inspections, ate lunch in the employee cafeteria. Nothing unusual. But at 3 p.m., he left his office and took a service elevator down to the lower levels. "He's heading toward the tunnel area," the surveillance officer radioed. Detective Briggs grabbed her jacket. "I'm going down there. Keep him under observation, but don't approach." She made her way through the airport to the construction area in Terminal C. The tunnel entrance had been resealed with temporary barriers after the forensics team finished processing the scene. She positioned herself in a maintenance corridor with a clear view of the area. After 10 minutes, she saw him. Gerald Nichols approached the barriers, looked around to ensure he was alone, and then moved one of the barriers aside. He slipped through the opening and disappeared into the tunnel. Detective Briggs waited, her heart pounding. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then Nichols emerged, his face pale, his hands shaking. He carefully repositioned the barrier and walked quickly back toward the elevator. She didn't confront him, didn't reveal her presence. Instead, she waited until he was gone, then entered the tunnel herself. The shrine room door was open. Inside, the camping chair had been moved, positioned now to face the empty alcove where the bodies had been discovered. And on the floor, placed carefully in the center of the room, was a fresh bouquet of yellow roses. Detective Briggs photographed everything, then called Dr. Kaspar. He came back. "He's mourning them." "Or saying goodbye," Dr. Kaspar suggested darkly. "If he knows we're getting close, he might be preparing to run." "Or preparing to finish what he started," Detective Briggs said, thinking of those recent photographs of Ellen Vance and the other family members. She left the tunnel and made her way back to headquarters, where Captain Morrison was waiting with new information. "We found something in his work records," Morrison said, spreading documents across his desk. "For the past 5 years, Nichols has been requesting night shifts specifically. He works 10:01 p.m. to 6:00 a.m., the same shift he was working the night the flight attendants disappeared. He's recreating it," Detective Briggs said. "Reliving it." Morrison nodded grimly. "And there's more. His schedule shows he has tomorrow night off. It's the first night he's had off in 3 months." Detective Briggs felt a chill run down her spine. "What's the date tomorrow?" Morrison checked his calendar and his face went white. "November 14th. It's the anniversary. 26 years to the day since the 4 flight attendants had vanished, and Gerald Nichols had the night off."
Gerald Nichols sat in his white pickup truck, engine idling, his eyes scanning the parking lot behind Building B. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Everything was falling apart. 26 years of careful planning, of maintaining control, and it was all unraveling because of that construction crew and their sledgehammers. He had known this day might come eventually. He had prepared for it, rehearsed it in his mind countless times. But now that it was here, fear clawed at his chest in a way he hadn't anticipated. Through the windshield, he saw Sarah emerge from the building, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight. His breath caught. She looked so much like Bethany. The same graceful walk, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. For a moment, he was transported back to November 1992, watching Bethany move through the airport terminal, unaware of his presence. Sarah approached the truck and opened the passenger door. Gerald forced a smile, trying to appear calm. "Hey, sweetheart, how were your classes?" She climbed in and set her backpack on the floor. "They were fine. Dad, where did you go this morning? You scared me." "Just had some errands to run," he said, putting the truck in gear. "Everything's okay now." But Sarah was looking at him strangely, her expression more guarded than usual. "Dad, I need to ask you something." Gerald's heart rate spiked. "What is it?" "That photograph I found in your truck. The woman in the flight attendant uniform. Who was she?" His mind raced. How much did she know? Had the police already contacted her? He glanced in the rearview mirror and spotted what might be an unmarked police car 3 rows back. They knew. They had found Sarah. "We need to go," he said urgently, pressing the accelerator harder than necessary. The truck lurched forward. "Dad, you're scaring me," Sarah said, gripping the door handle. "What's going on?" "Did you talk to anyone today?" he demanded. "Anyone unusual? Did anyone ask you questions about me?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. Gerald cursed and made a sharp turn out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In his mirror, he saw the unmarked car following, no longer bothering with subtlety. "Dad, stop the truck," Sarah said, her voice rising. "Stop it right now." "I can't," he said, taking another turn too fast. "You don't understand, Sarah. They're trying to take you away from me. They're going to fill your head with lies." "What lies?" Sarah shouted. "Tell me the truth. Was that woman my mother? Was she?" Gerald's vision blurred with tears. "You weren't supposed to find out this way. I was going to tell you when you were ready." "Tell me what? That you kidnapped me? That you murdered my mother?" The words hung in the air like poison. Gerald felt something inside him break. She knew. His Sarah, his daughter, his reason for living, knew what he had done. "It wasn't like that," he said desperately, running a red light. Behind them, police sirens wailed to life. "Your mother was special. They were all special. They didn't understand how I felt about them, but I never wanted to hurt them. It just happened. It went wrong." "You killed 4 women," Sarah said, her voice shaking with horror and rage. "You killed my mother and kept me prisoner my entire life." "I saved you," Gerald shouted. "I raised you. I gave you everything. I loved you." "You're insane," Sarah breathed. Gerald swerved to avoid another car, his driving becoming more erratic as panic overwhelmed rational thought. More police vehicles joined the chase, boxing him in from multiple directions. He made a desperate turn onto a side street, but it dead-ended at a construction site. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop just feet from a chain-link fence. Police cars surrounded them immediately, officers emerging with weapons drawn. "Get out of the vehicle! Hands where we can see them!" Gerald sat frozen, his mind unable to process the end of everything he had built. Sarah was crying beside him, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her. "I'm so sorry, Bethany." "I'm not Bethany," Sarah said through her tears. "My name is Sarah, and you took my mother from me." The driver's side door was yanked open. Hands grabbed Gerald, pulled him from the truck, forced him to the ground. He didn't resist. There was no point anymore. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he watched Sarah being helped from the passenger side by a woman he recognized as one of the detectives who had been investigating. "Don't hurt her," he called out. "Please don't hurt my daughter." Detective Briggs appeared in his field of vision, her expression hard. "She's not your daughter. She's Bethany Cross's daughter, and you stole 25 years of her life." They hauled him to his feet and read him his rights, but Gerald barely heard the words. His eyes stayed on Sarah as another officer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and led her to a police car. She looked back at him once, her face a mask of betrayal and grief, and then she was gone. At airport police headquarters, Gerald Nichols was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Detective Briggs and Captain Morrison sat across from him, a recorder running between them. Gerald had waived his right to an attorney, much to their surprise. "I want to tell you everything," he said quietly. "I'm tired of carrying it alone." Detective Briggs exchanged a glance with Morrison, then nodded. "Start at the beginning. November 14th, 1992. Gerald closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was distant, as if recounting someone else's memories. "I had been watching them for months. Patricia, Denise, Yolanda, and Bethany. They were so beautiful, so kind. They would smile at me when they saw me in the terminals, ask how my day was going. No one else ever did that." "So you stalked them," Detective Briggs said flatly. "I was learning about them," Gerald corrected. "Their schedules, their routines, their lives. I took photographs because I wanted to remember every moment. I knew Bethany was pregnant. I could see the change in her, the way she carried herself. I thought about the baby she would have, wondered if it would have her eyes. And on November 14th, Morrison prompted. Gerald's hands trembled on the table. I knew their shift schedule. I knew they would take the service elevator down to the lower level to access the crew entrance. I waited in the maintenance tunnel. I just wanted to talk to Bethany, to tell her how I felt. But all four of them came down together. He paused, his breathing becoming labored. Patricia recognized me. She smiled and said hello. I tried to tell them why I was there, tried to explain how special they were to me, but Denise got scared. She said I shouldn't be down there, that they were going to report me. She reached for her radio. So you attacked them, Detective Briggs said. I panicked, Gerald said, his voice breaking. There was a pipe on the ground, part of some repair work. I grabbed it. I just wanted them to stop, to listen. But Patricia tried to run, and I swung at her. Then everything happened so fast. Yolanda was screaming. Denise was trying to pull Bethany away. I couldn't let them leave. They would tell. They would ruin everything. The horror of what he was describing hung heavy in the room. Morrison had to look away. Bethany was last, Gerald continued, tears streaming down his face now. She was backing away from me, her hands on her stomach, protecting her baby. She begged me not to hurt her. She said she forgave me, that she understood I was sick, that I needed help. She was so kind, even at the end. But you killed her anyway, Detective Briggs said, her voice hard. My hands were around her throat before I realized what I was doing, Gerald whispered. She looked into my eyes, and I saw something there. Not fear, pity. She pitied me, and then she was gone. He buried his face in his hands. I sat with them for hours afterward. I didn't know what to do. I knew I should turn myself in, face what I had done. But then I thought about Bethany's baby, that innocent life. I could save it. I could raise it right, give it the love and care it deserved. So you delivered the baby yourself? Morrison asked, horrified. Gerald nodded. Emergency C-section, right there in the tunnel. I had read medical textbooks, watched videos. I thought I could do it. By some miracle, the baby survived. A little girl, she was so small, so perfect. You kept her in a storage unit for 25 years, Detective Briggs said. You stole her childhood, her identity, her chance at a normal life. I gave her everything I could, Gerald insisted. I educated her, cared for her, kept her safe from a world that would have destroyed her. She's brilliant, kind, everything her mother was. She's traumatized, Detective Briggs corrected. She's a victim, just like her mother, just like the other 3 women you murdered. Gerald slumped in his chair, the weight of his crimes finally settling on him fully. What will happen to her now? That's none of your concern, Morrison said coldly. What will happen to you is you'll spend the rest of your life in prison for 4 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Can I see her? Gerald asked desperately. One more time? To say goodbye? No, Detective Briggs said, standing. You'll never see her again, and that's the least of what you deserve. As they led him back to the holding cell, Gerald Nichols looked smaller somehow, diminished. The monster who had haunted the airport's tunnels for 26 years was just a broken, pathetic man facing the consequences of his obsession. But Detective Briggs felt no satisfaction. 4 women were still dead. Families had still suffered for over 2 decades, and Sarah Nichols, née Bethany Cross Jr., would carry the scars of her stolen childhood for the rest of her life. The media descended on the story within hours. By evening, every news station was covering the arrest, the discovered remains, the shocking revelation of the surviving daughter. Captain Morrison held a press conference, carefully controlling what information was released to protect Sarah's privacy. In a quiet room away from the chaos, Ellen Vance sat with Sarah, 2 women connected by tragedy in ways neither could have imagined. Rachel Holbrook was there too, along with representatives from the families of Yolanda Martinez and Patricia Vance. Your mother was brave, Ellen told Sarah gently, showing her photographs of Bethany from before the murders. She was the youngest of the crew, but everyone loved her. She was funny and warm and kind. Sarah traced her finger over her mother's face in the photograph. I wish I could have known her. She knew you, Rachel said. She was carrying you when she died. You were loved from the very beginning. Sarah's shoulders shook with sobs, and Ellen pulled her into an embrace. You have us now, Ellen said. We're your family, your mother's family. You're not alone anymore." Outside the window, the sun was setting over Dallas, casting long shadows across the city. In an airport terminal across town, passengers boarded planes, unaware of the horror that had unfolded beneath their feet decades ago. Life continued, indifferent to the darkness that occasionally surfaced. But for the families of the vanished crew, for Sarah, who had been born into captivity, and for the investigators who had finally brought a killer to justice, nothing would ever be quite the same.
3 months later, Ellen Vance stood in a small cemetery in Arlington, Texas, watching as 4 caskets were lowered into the ground side by side. The memorial service had drawn hundreds of people, former colleagues of the flight attendants, investigators who had worked the case, and family members who had waited 26 years for this moment. The winter sun was pale and cold, but Ellen barely felt it. Her mother's grave was just 30 feet away, and Ellen took some comfort knowing that Patricia would now rest near the mother who had died, still searching for her. Sarah stood beside her, wearing a black dress Ellen had helped her pick out. It was one of many firsts for Sarah over the past 3 months. First time in a department store, first time choosing her own clothes, first time making decisions without Gerald Nichols controlling every aspect of her life. The adjustment had been difficult. Sarah was living temporarily with Ellen while she worked with therapists to process her trauma. Some days were better than others. Some days, Sarah could barely get out of bed, overwhelmed by the reality of what had been done to her. Other days, she showed remarkable resilience, determined to build the life she had been denied. The minister concluded the service with a prayer, and people began to disperse. Rachel Holbrook approached them, her eyes red from crying. "Denise would have wanted to know you," Rachel said to Sarah, touching her arm gently. "She was always the nurturing one. She would have been a wonderful aunt to you." "I wish I could have known all of them," Sarah said softly. As the crowd thinned, Detective Briggs made her way over. She had been instrumental in helping Sarah navigate the legal and practical challenges of establishing a new identity, accessing education records, and beginning to build an independent life. "The trial date has been set," Detective Briggs said. "July 15th. The prosecutor wanted me to let you know that you don't have to testify if you don't want to. Gerald's confession is detailed enough." Sarah considered this. Over the past months, she had been wrestling with complicated feelings about the man she had called father for 25 years. Part of her still remembered the kindness he had shown her, the bedtime stories, the patient tutoring, but that was increasingly overshadowed by the horror of understanding what he had done, how he had manipulated her, how he had stolen her mother from her. "I want to testify," Sarah said firmly. "Those women deserve to have someone speak for them, and I need to face him, to tell him that I'm not his anymore." Detective Briggs nodded with respect. "You're stronger than you know." After the detective left, Ellen and Sarah walked together among the headstones. Patricia's new grave marker was simple but elegant, listing her dates of birth and death, and the words, "Beloved daughter, sister, and friend, forever in flight." "Tell me about her," Sarah said. "Tell me what she was like." Ellen smiled, memories flooding back. "She was fearless. When we were kids, I was always the cautious one, but Patricia would climb the highest trees, explore the darkest parts of the woods behind our house. She wanted to see everything, experience everything. Is that why she became a flight attendant? That was part of it. But she also loved people. She had this gift for making everyone feel special, feel seen. Passengers would request her flight specifically because she remembered their names, asked about their families. They sat on a bench near the graves, and Ellen continued sharing stories, Patricia teaching her to ride a bike, Patricia defending her from bullies in middle school, Patricia calling every week from whatever city she had landed in, always making time for family, no matter how busy she was. "She would have fought for you," Ellen said. "If she had known what was going to happen, if she had any chance to protect you and your mother, she would have." Detective Briggs said they all tried to protect each other. Sarah said. In his confession, Gerald said Yolanda threw herself in front of Denise when he attacked. Patricia tried to use her radio to call for help even after she was injured. They were heroes, Ellen said. Sarah pulled something from her pocket, a small photograph that Detective Briggs had retrieved from the evidence collected in the shrine room. It showed Bethany Cross in her flight attendant uniform, smiling at the camera, one hand resting on her barely visible baby bump. She was so young, Sarah whispered. Only 23. But she was excited about you. Rachel told me that Bethany had already picked out nursery colors, had names selected. She couldn't wait to be a mother. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. He took that from both of us. He took everything. Ellen wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He took the past. But we have the future. We have each other. Over the following weeks, Sarah began to find her footing. She enrolled in college officially, this time under her legal name, Sarah Cross, which she had chosen to honor her mother. She made friends cautiously, still learning how to navigate social relationships after a lifetime of isolation. She also began volunteering with an organization that helped victims of kidnapping and long-term captivity. Her unique perspective and hard-won strength made her a powerful advocate for others who had survived similar ordeals. Ellen watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Sarah would never get back the childhood that had been stolen from her, would never know the mother who had died trying to protect her. But she was building something new, something her own. In April, Ellen received a call from Captain Morrison. I thought you should know. We've been investigating whether there were other victims. We searched Gerald's home thoroughly, looked through decades of records. Ellen's stomach clenched. And we found evidence connecting him to 3 other unsolved disappearances over the years, all women who worked at the airport in various capacities. We're still working to confirm, but it appears your sister and her crew weren't his only victims. Ellen closed her eyes. How many? Possibly 7 in total, but we'll probably never know for certain. He's not cooperating with the investigation into the other cases. After the call ended, Ellen sat for a long time, thinking about all the families out there who might finally get answers, who might finally be able to lay their loved ones to rest. The scope of Gerald Nichols's crimes was even worse than they had initially believed. When July arrived and the trial began, Sarah kept her promise to testify. The courtroom was packed with media, family members, and curious onlookers. Gerald Nichols sat at the defense table, looking smaller and older than he had at his arrest. He refused to look at Sarah when she took the stand. Please state your name for the record, the prosecutor said gently. My name is Sarah Cross, she said clearly, her voice steady. I am the daughter of Bethany Cross, who was murdered on November 14, 1992, by the defendant. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah described her life in captivity, the storage unit that had been her entire world, the isolation, the manipulation, the lies. But she also spoke about her mother, about the strength Bethany had shown in her final moments, about the love that had allowed Sarah to survive even in the womb as her mother died. He told me he loved me, Sarah said, finally looking at Gerald. But love doesn't imprison, love doesn't steal, love doesn't murder. What he felt wasn't love. It was possession, and I refused to be possessed by him anymore. Gerald's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks, but Sarah didn't waver. She had found her voice, and she was using it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Gerald Nichols was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for Sarah's kidnapping. As he was led from the courtroom, he turned one last time to look at Sarah. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Sarah stood, supported by Ellen on one side and Rachel on the other, and said loudly enough for the whole courtroom to hear, I forgive you for what you did to me, but I will never forgive you for what you took from my mother. Outside the courthouse, journalists clamored for interviews, but Sarah pushed through them with help from Detective Briggs. Later, in the quiet of Ellen's home, the families of the victims gathered for a private dinner, a memorial to the women they had loved and lost. Sarah raised her glass. To Patricia, Denise, Yolanda, and Bethany. To the mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends who were taken too soon, may they rest in peace, and may their memories be a blessing. To the vanished crew, Ellen echoed, and everyone drank. As the evening wore on and stories were shared, laughter mixing with tears, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The weight she had carried since learning the truth about her origins didn't disappear, but it became more bearable, shared among people who understood. She looked around the room at these women and men who had welcomed her into their grief, who had chosen to see her not as the daughter of their loved one's killer, but as another victim who deserved compassion and family. For the first time in her 25 years, Sarah Cross felt like she belonged. Ellen Vance couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, staring out at the quiet street bathed in the pale light of dawn. November 14, 2018. 26 years exactly since Patricia had vanished. Detective Briggs had called the previous evening with instructions that Ellen found both comforting and terrifying. "We have a suspect under surveillance. We believe you may be at risk. An officer will be stationed outside your house until this is resolved." Ellen had spotted the unmarked police car parked 3 houses down when she woke at 5 a.m., unable to sleep. The officer inside sat alert, occasionally scanning the street. His presence should have made her feel safe, but instead it made the danger feel more real. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Rachel Holbrook. "You can't sleep either," Rachel said when Ellen answered. "No. You? I keep thinking about what the detective said, that he's been watching us, that he might have been planning." Rachel's voice broke. "The police are protecting us," Ellen said, trying to sound confident. "They know who he is now. They're going to stop him." "But they haven't arrested him yet. Why haven't they arrested him?" Ellen didn't have an answer to that. Detective Briggs had explained something about evidence and building a case that would hold up in court, but Ellen didn't understand why they couldn't just lock him up and sort out the details later. "I'm going to the police station today," Ellen said. "Detective Briggs wants me to look at some photographs, see if I recognize anyone from Patricia's life back then." "Be careful," Rachel said. "Please be careful." After they hung up, Ellen got dressed and tried to eat breakfast, but her stomach was in knots. The officer in the unmarked car followed her when she drove to the airport police headquarters an hour later, maintaining a discreet distance, but never letting her out of sight. Detective Briggs met her in the lobby, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes were rumpled. "Thank you for coming," the detective said, leading Ellen to a conference room. "I know this is a difficult day for you." Ellen sat down at the table where several photo albums had been laid out. "Are these from the tunnel?" "Some of them," Detective Briggs confirmed. "We're trying to establish connections between the suspect and your sister. Anything you can tell us might help." She opened the first album, revealing photographs that had been removed from the shrine room and individually preserved in evidence sleeves. Ellen's breath caught when she saw Patricia's face, young and vibrant, captured in surveillance photos she had never known existed. "He was following her," Ellen whispered. "Before she disappeared, he was already watching her." Detective Briggs nodded. "These photos span several weeks leading up to November 14, 1992. We believe he was stalking all 4 women." Ellen studied each photograph carefully. Patricia at a grocery store, Patricia leaving the gym, Patricia meeting friends for lunch. In every image, she was unaware of the camera, living her life with no idea that someone was documenting her every move. "I don't understand," Ellen said. "Why them? What made him choose these 4 women?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Detective Briggs replied. "Did your sister ever mention feeling uncomfortable at the airport? Being followed or watched?" Ellen thought back, reaching through decades of memory. She complained once about a maintenance worker who kept showing up wherever she was. She thought it was coincidence at first, but it happened several times in 1 week. She mentioned it to her supervisor. Detective Briggs leaned forward. Do you remember when this was? Maybe a month before she disappeared. She said the supervisor talked to the worker and it stopped. Did she ever tell you the worker's name? Ellen shook her head. Just that he was older, kind of quiet. She felt bad about reporting him because she thought maybe he was just lonely and didn't mean any harm. Detective Briggs made notes, her expression grim. That matched the profile they were building of Gerald Nichols. A quiet man, socially isolated, who had developed an obsession with women who showed him any kindness or attention. There's something else I need to tell you, Detective Briggs said. We found more recent photographs in the room where we discovered the shrine. Photographs of you. Ellen felt the blood drain from her face. Of me? The detective pulled out a separate folder and opened it carefully. Inside were photos Ellen recognized immediately. Herself leaving her accounting office, herself at her mother's funeral 6 months ago, herself grocery shopping just last week. Oh God, Ellen breathed. How long has he been watching me? We're not certain. The photos appear to have been taken over the past year, but there could be more we haven't found yet. Ellen's hands shook as she looked through the images. The idea that someone had been following her, photographing her, while she went about her daily life was violating in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Why? She asked. What does he want with me? Detective Briggs chose her words carefully. We believe he's been maintaining a connection to the victims through their families. You represent Patricia to him. You're part of his fantasy, his ongoing relationship with the women he killed. Ellen pushed the photos away, feeling sick. You said you have him under surveillance. Where is he right now? He's at home. We have officers watching him. He won't get near you, I promise. But even as Detective Briggs said it, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Excuse me, she said, standing abruptly and stepping out of the room. Ellen sat alone with the photographs spread before her, trying to process everything. Her sister had been murdered by someone who had become obsessed with her, and now that same person was obsessed with Ellen herself. The thought made her skin crawl. Out in the hallway, Detective Briggs was on the phone with Detective Torres. What do you mean you lost him? He left his house 20 minutes ago, Torres said, his voice tight with stress. We followed him to a shopping center, watched him go into a store, but he never came out. We checked the store, the surrounding area. He's gone. How is that possible? You had eyes on him the whole time. There must be a back exit we didn't know about. We're canvassing now, but he had at least a 15-minute head start. Detective Briggs cursed under her breath. Put out a bolo on his vehicle, alert all units, and get someone to Ellen Vance's house immediately. If he's running, he might go after the families. She returned to the conference room, trying to keep her expression neutral. Ellen, I need you to stay here for a while. We're taking some additional precautions. Ellen studied her face. Something's wrong. What happened? We've temporarily lost sight of our suspect. It's probably nothing, just a miscommunication, but I want you somewhere safe until we locate him again. Ellen stood, her fear evident. You lost him? The man who killed my sister, who's been photographing me, and you lost him. We have officers searching everywhere he might go, Detective Briggs assured her. But I need you to trust me and stay here where we can protect you. Before Ellen could respond, Captain Morrison rushed into the room. We found his truck, abandoned in a parking garage downtown. No sign of Nichols. Detective Briggs felt her stomach drop. He's running. Pull his credit cards, his bank accounts. Check traffic cameras. I want to know where he went. Morrison hesitated. There's something else. We got the results back on those hair samples from the shrine room. The DNA analysis is complete. And The hair belongs to Gerald Nichols, as expected. But there's another DNA profile too, a female. We ran it through CODIS and got a familial match. Detective Briggs waited, dreading what was coming. The female DNA is related to Bethany Cross, Morrison said quietly. It's her daughter. Ellen gasped. Bethany had a daughter? Bethany was pregnant when she disappeared, Detective Briggs said, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. The medical examiner mentioned she found evidence of a pregnancy in the remains, early term. We assumed the fetus didn't survive. But if there's a daughter, Morrison said. Detective Briggs finished the thought. He kept her. Gerald Nichols took Bethany Cross's baby and kept her alive all these years. The room fell silent as the full horror of that revelation sank in. Somewhere out there was a young woman, approximately 25 years old, who had no idea she was the daughter of a murdered flight attendant, a woman who had been raised by her mother's killer. We need to find her, Ellen said urgently. If Nichols is running, he might hurt her. Detective Briggs was already pulling up Nichols' file, looking for any information about family members or dependents. He listed himself as single, no children, on all his employment records. Check property records, Morrison suggested. Maybe he has a second residence we don't know about. Torres called back. We pulled his bank records. There's a recurring payment every month to a storage facility in Grand Prairie. Unit 247. The account's been active for 23 years. Detective Briggs grabbed her jacket. Get me the address. And send backup. If he's been hiding someone there. She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what they might find in that storage unit. Either evidence of another victim or a young woman who had lived her entire life as the captive of a serial killer. Ellen stood. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, Detective Briggs said firmly. You need to stay here where you're safe. If Bethany's daughter is out there, she deserves to know her mother didn't abandon her. She deserves to know the truth. Detective Briggs wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in Ellen's eyes. This woman had spent 26 years searching for her sister, and now there was a chance to save someone else's daughter. You stay in the car, Detective Briggs finally said. No matter what happens, you stay in the car with an officer. Understood? Ellen nodded. 20 minutes later, a convoy of police vehicles pulled into the storage facility in Grand Prairie. The manager met them at the gate, nervous and confused. Unit 247. That's been rented by the same guy for over 20 years, never late on a payment, never any complaints. Open it, Detective Briggs ordered. They made their way through the maze of storage units to number 247. It was larger than most, a climate-controlled unit at the back of the facility. The manager unlocked the padlock and rolled up the metal door. Inside was not the dungeon Detective Briggs had feared. Instead, she found what looked like a small, carefully maintained living space. There was a cot with clean bedding, a small refrigerator, bookshelves filled with novels and textbooks, a portable television. In the corner sat a desk with a laptop and neatly organized school supplies. On the wall hung a bulletin board covered with photographs, certificates, and awards. Detective Briggs stepped closer and felt her heart sink. The photos showed a young woman at various ages, a child at a school play, a teenager accepting an academic award, a young woman in a graduation cap and gown. She's real, Morrison breathed beside her. He really kept Bethany's daughter alive. But the unit was empty now. Whoever had been living here was gone, and so was Gerald Nichols. On the desk, Detective Briggs found a note written in neat feminine handwriting. Dad said we had to leave. He said it wasn't safe anymore. I don't understand what's happening. I'm scared. The note was dated that morning. The laptop sat on the evidence table at Airport Police Headquarters, its screen glowing in the dim conference room. The tech specialist, a young man named Kevin Park, typed rapidly while Detective Briggs, Captain Morrison, and Detective Torres watched over his shoulder. The browsing history is extensive, Kevin said. Lots of educational sites, community college course pages, job search websites. Whoever used this computer was trying to build a normal life. What about emails? Detective Briggs asked. Social media? Kevin shook his head. That's the strange part. No email account, no Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, nothing. It's like she didn't exist online beyond these educational sites. He kept her isolated, Morrison said grimly. No digital footprint means no connections to the outside world. Wait, Kevin said, clicking on a folder. There's something here. A journal kept as Word documents. Entries going back years. He opened the most recent file, dated November 13, 2018, just yesterday. Detective Briggs leaned in to read. Dad has been acting strange all week. He keeps staring at me like he's trying to memorize my face. Tonight, he told me we have to leave the storage unit tomorrow, that it's not safe to stay here anymore. He won't tell me why. He won't tell me anything. I'm 25 years old, and I've never had a real home. Never had friends. Never been allowed to go anywhere without him watching. He says it's because the world is dangerous, because people would hurt me if they knew about me. But I'm starting to wonder if the danger is him. I found something in his truck last week, a photograph of a woman who looks like me. She was wearing a uniform, a flight attendant uniform. When I asked him about it, he got angry in a way I've never seen before. He said I was never supposed to see that. He said I reminded him of someone he lost. What if I'm not his daughter? What if everything he's told me is a lie? The room fell silent. Detective Briggs felt a weight settling on her chest. This young woman had spent her entire life in captivity, never knowing her real mother, never knowing the truth. Keep reading, she said quietly. Kevin scrolled to an earlier entry from 6 months ago. Dad got me enrolled at community college. I start next month. I can't believe it. After all these years of homeschooling in this storage unit, I'm finally going to meet other people. He's nervous about it, made me promise not to tell anyone about where we live or about him. He made me memorize a fake address in case anyone asks. I have to use the name he gave me, Sarah Nichols. But sometimes I wonder what my real name should be. Sometimes I have dreams about a woman with dark hair singing to me. When I wake up, I can almost remember the song, but then it fades away. Morrison touched Detective Briggs's shoulder. We need to find her before he does something drastic. If he thinks we're closing in, if he's panicking. He won't hurt her, Detective Briggs said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. He's kept her alive for 25 years. She's important to him. She's a liability now, Torres countered. She's evidence, and according to that journal entry, she's starting to ask questions. Detective Briggs's phone rang. It was the officer stationed outside Ellen Vance's house. Detective, you need to know something. I've been reviewing the security camera footage from Ms. Vance's neighborhood. There's a white pickup truck that's driven past her house 4 times in the last week. Same truck we ID'd as belonging to Nichols. He's been stalking her in person, Detective Briggs said. She turned to Morrison. We need to find out if Sarah Nichols enrolled at any local community colleges. If she did, she might be there right now. Kevin was already searching. Dallas County Community College has a Sarah Nichols enrolled, started classes in September. Her schedule shows she has a psychology class this morning at 10. Detective Briggs checked her watch. It was 9:15 a.m. Which campus? Brookhaven, in North Dallas. They were in the car within minutes, Torres driving while Detective Briggs called ahead to campus security. The traffic was mercifully light, and they made it to the college in 25 minutes. The campus security director met them at the main administration building. Sarah Nichols is listed in Dr. Marshall's Introduction to Psychology class. It meets in Building C, room 214. Class started 15 minutes ago. They made their way quickly across the campus, trying not to draw attention. Detective Briggs's mind raced with scenarios. If Gerald Nichols was here, if he had come to get Sarah before they could reach her, there was no telling what he might do. Building C was a modern structure with large windows and open hallways. They took the stairs to the second floor and approached room 214 cautiously. Through the small window in the door, Detective Briggs could see approximately 30 students seated in rows, listening to a professor lecture about behavioral psychology. And there, in the third row, sat a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was taking notes diligently, completely absorbed in the lecture. Her profile was unmistakable, the shape of her face, the set of her eyes. She looked exactly like the photographs of Bethany Cross. "That's her," Detective Briggs whispered. They waited outside the classroom, not wanting to cause a scene. Detective Briggs positioned uniformed officers at all the building exits, just in case Nichols tried to grab her. The hour crawled by with agonizing slowness. When the class finally ended and students began filing out, Detective Briggs stepped forward. "Sarah Nichols?" The young woman looked up, startled. Up close, the resemblance to Bethany Cross was even more striking. She had the same warm brown eyes, the same delicate features. "Yes," she said uncertainly, clutching her textbooks to her chest. Detective Briggs showed her badge. "I'm Detective Sandra Briggs with the airport police. I need you to come with me, please. You're not in trouble, but we need to talk to you about your father." Sarah's face went pale. "What's happened? Is he okay?" "Let's go somewhere private where we can talk." They led her to a small office that the campus security director made available. Sarah sat down, her hands shaking. "Please, you have to tell me what's going on. Where's my dad?" Detective Briggs pulled up a chair opposite her, trying to figure out how to explain a horror that had spanned over 2 decades. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. We believe that the man you know as your father, Gerald Nichols, is responsible for a serious crime." "What kind of crime?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. In November 1992, 4 flight attendants disappeared from Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Their bodies were discovered 3 weeks ago. We have evidence that connects Gerald Nichols to their murders. Sarah stared at her, uncomprehending. "That's impossible. My dad works at the airport, but he's not a murderer." "One of those 4 women was Bethany Cross," Detective Briggs continued gently. "She was 23 years old when she disappeared, and she was pregnant." Sarah went very still. Detective Briggs could see her mind working, making connections she didn't want to make. "We ran DNA analysis on evidence from the crime scene," Detective Briggs said. "Your DNA was found there, Sarah. You're Bethany Cross's daughter." "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. My mother died when I was born. That's what he told me. She died and he raised me alone." "Your mother was murdered," Detective Briggs said, hating the brutality of the words, but knowing Sarah deserved the truth. "Gerald Nichols killed her and 3 other women. He took you from her and has been keeping you hidden all these years." Sarah stood abruptly, backing away. "You're lying. This is some kind of mistake. He's my father. He raised me. He took care of me." "He kept you prisoner," Torres said from where he stood by the door. "You lived in a storage unit, Sarah. You had no friends, no real identity. That's not a father. That's a captor." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "But he loved me. He taught me to read. He made sure I ate healthy food. He got me into college. Why would he do those things if he was a monster?" "Because you looked like your mother," Detective Briggs said softly. "You were his connection to Bethany. In his twisted mind, he was keeping her alive through you." Sarah sank back into the chair, her whole body shaking. The photograph in his truck, the woman in the flight attendant uniform, that was her? That was my real mother? Detective Briggs pulled up a photo on her phone, one of Bethany Cross from before the murders. "This is Bethany, your mother." Sarah took the phone with trembling hands and stared at the image. "I look just like her." "You do. And your mother loved you, Sarah. She wanted you. What happened to her wasn't her choice." "Where is he now?" Sarah asked. "Where's Gerald?" "We don't know. He disappeared this morning. We think he might try to contact you." Sarah wiped her eyes. And when she looked up, something had changed in her expression. The shock was giving way to something harder, more determined. "He will try to contact me. He always does when I'm at school. He texts me every hour to check on me." "He has your cell phone number?" Detective Briggs asked. Sarah pulled out a simple flip phone from her bag. "He gave me this phone 2 years ago. It can only call and text him. No internet, no other contacts allowed." Detective Briggs looked at Torres. "We can use this. If he reaches out to her, I can help you catch him," Sarah said quietly. "Tell me what to do." Over the next hour, they prepared Sarah for what might come. The tech team set up equipment to trace any calls or texts that came to her phone. A female officer dressed in civilian clothes would pose as a student and stay close to Sarah in case Nichols appeared in person. As they worked, Detective Briggs learned more about Sarah's life. She had been raised in isolation, homeschooled using materials Nichols purchased, allowed out only for carefully supervised trips to the library or grocery store. He had controlled every aspect of her existence while telling her it was for her own protection. "I tried to run away once," Sarah admitted. "When I was 16, I made it as far as a bus station before he found me. He didn't hit me or anything. He just cried. He told me that if I left, people would take me away and I'd never see him again. He made it sound like I was the one abandoning him." "Classic manipulation," Detective Briggs said, "making you feel guilty for wanting freedom." At noon, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Nichols. "Are you okay? Where are you?" Sarah looked to Detective Briggs, who nodded. Sarah typed back, "I'm at school. Just finished psych class." "Where are you?" "You were gone when I woke up." The response came quickly. "Had to run an errand. I'll pick you up after your next class. 2 p.m. Wait for me in the usual spot." "Usual spot?" Detective Briggs asked. "The parking lot behind Building B," Sarah said. "He always picks me up there because there are fewer people around." Detective Briggs immediately began coordinating with her team. They would have unmarked cars in position, plainclothes officers strategically placed. When Nichols arrived, they would take him. The hours until 2 o'clock dragged. Sarah attended her next class with the undercover officer, trying to act normal while knowing her whole world had been turned upside down. Detective Briggs positioned herself with a clear view of the parking lot, watching for Nichols's white pickup truck. At 1:55 p.m., the truck pulled into the lot. 5 years after the trial, on a warm November morning, Sarah Cross stood at a podium in the main terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Behind her, a bronze memorial had been unveiled, featuring the names and photographs of Patricia Vance, Denise Holbrook, Yolanda Martinez, and Bethany Cross. The inscription read, "In memory of 4 dedicated flight attendants who lost their lives in service. May their courage and kindness never be forgotten." Sarah, now 30 years old, had earned her degree in psychology and was working as a counselor specializing in trauma recovery. She wore a simple blue dress, and around her neck hung a gold cross that had belonged to her mother, returned to her from the evidence locker. 5 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the crowd that had gathered, "I learned the truth about my origins. It was the most devastating and liberating moment of my life. Devastating because I discovered the depth of evil that exists in the world. Liberating because I also discovered the strength of love and resilience." Ellen Vance sat in the front row, smiling through tears. Beside her were Rachel Holbrook, Captain Morrison, and Detective Briggs, all of whom had become important figures in Sarah's life. "My mother, Bethany Cross, was 23 years old when she died," Sarah continued. "She was excited about becoming a mother. She had dreams for her future. All 4 of these women had dreams, had families who loved them, had so much life left to live." She paused, gathering her emotions. "Gerald Nichols tried to erase them. He tried to make their deaths invisible, their lives forgotten. But he failed. Because we remember. We honor them. We carry them forward." Sarah gestured to the memorial. "This monument stands as a reminder that evil may hide in plain sight, but truth will eventually surface. Justice may be delayed, but it will prevail, and love, even love that seems lost forever, finds a way to endure. As she concluded her speech, airport employees released 4 white doves into the terminal's soaring atrium. The birds circled once, then flew toward the windows and the bright Texas sky beyond. After the ceremony, Sarah walked with Ellen to the lower levels of Terminal C, to the section where the maintenance tunnel had been. The area had been completely renovated, transformed into a bright, modern space. A small plaque on the wall marked where the bodies had been discovered, but the darkness had been driven out by light and memory. "Do you ever regret it?" Ellen asked. "Learning the truth? Some people might prefer not to know." Sarah considered the question. "The truth was painful. It still is, but it set me free. I'm not living in a storage unit anymore, not physically or emotionally. I'm building the life my mother wanted for me." They stood together in silence, honoring the space where so much tragedy had unfolded, where 4 women had lost their lives, and 1 small girl had, against all odds, survived. "Your mother would be proud of you," Ellen said softly. "So would your sister," Sarah replied. As they made their way back to the terminal, Sarah thought about the long journey from that storage unit to this moment. The therapy sessions, the nightmares, the slow process of learning to trust and to hope. It hadn't been easy. Some days it still wasn't, but she had survived. And more than that, she had found purpose in her pain. Every person she helped heal from trauma, every survivor she counseled through their darkest moments, was a testament to her mother's strength and the love that had sustained Sarah, even when she didn't know its source. Gerald Nichols was serving his sentences in a maximum security prison. Sarah had received letters from him over the years, letters she returned unopened. She didn't need his apologies or explanations. She had found her own truth, her own peace. Outside the airport, Sarah paused to look up at the planes taking off into the November sky, each one carrying passengers to new destinations, new lives. She thought about her mother's love of flying, of seeing the world from above. "I'm going to travel," Sarah announced suddenly. "I've spent my whole life in one place. It's time to see the world." Ellen smiled. "Where will you go first?" Sarah thought about it, remembering stories she had heard about her mother's favorite routes. "Seattle, that's where Flight 447 was supposed to go. I want to complete that journey for them." "Then that's where you'll go," Ellen said, "and I'll go with you if you want company." "I'd like that." As they walked to the parking garage, Sarah felt the weight of the past settling into something she could carry. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but integrated into who she was becoming. She was Sarah Cross, daughter of Bethany Cross, survivor, counselor, advocate. She was the living legacy of 4 women who had walked into an airport one November night and never walked out. But their story didn't end in that dark tunnel. It continued in Sarah, in the memorial that would stand for generations, in the justice that had finally been served. The vanished crew had been found, the darkness had been brought to light, and life, precious and fragile and beautiful, went on. Sarah looked back one last time at the airport terminal, at the place that held so much pain and, now, so much meaning. Then she climbed into Ellen's car, ready to move forward, carrying her mother's memory like wings. The flight attendants' memorial stood silent in the terminal behind them, bronze and eternal, a reminder that some stories, no matter how dark their beginning, can find their way toward hope.